SpeedGrade has 4 scopes. 3 of them are ones that you've worked with inside Premiere Pro, the waveform scope, vector scope, and the RGB parade. The 4th one is a histogram. We're going to take a look at all 4 scopes in this lesson, and I want to compare them to the scopes inside Premiere Pro. So to get started, go to Working Files, go to the Premiere Pro projects, and open up SG Scopes. I have the reference monitor kind of expanded here a bit so you can see it better. And I want to show you all 4 scopes. So to do that, I go to the panel menu, click on this little drop-down list there, and go down to All Scopes. And there are the 4 scopes inside Premiere Pro: the waveform scope, the vector scope, RGB parade, and the YCB CR parade. Now, we don't work with the YCB CR parade. It's more for technical purposes. So rather than show all 4 like this, let's take a look at the 3 we work with. Go back up to the panel menu and click on this and go down to Vector, YC Wave, and RGB Parade. And there are the 3 scopes that we work with here inside Premiere Pro. Now I want to open up SpeedGrade. So I'm going to minimize Premiere Pro here and go on over to SpeedGrade and open it up by double-clicking on it. And now I want to open up the same project. And there's a hot link to it here in the recent project list, but it probably won't be in your list. So you need to go to Open Project like that and track that down here inside the Premiere Pro Projects folder. And there it is. Double-click on that. Say Open. And there's the same project. Let's move your playhead to the 3rd clip here, the coast clip, by just dragging it to the right, like so. Let's take a look at the 4 scopes here. Right now I'm set to 1 scope. You may be set to some other number. Just click this drop-down arrow there and select 4 scopes. I'm looking at the 10-bit view, which means we look at luma gradations here from 0 to 1023, and I think 10-bit is where you should work. You can change it to other values as well, but we're sticking with 10-bit here. And here are the 4 scopes. We've got the waveform, RGB parade, vector scope, and there's the histogram. Let's switch this view to 1 scope. Go back down here to the drop-down list, and we'll select 1 scope. I want you to go get the waveform scope. So right-click here in some place and click on Waveform, which looks pretty much like the waveform scope inside Premiere Pro. But right now the scale's kind of funny because sometimes it takes a while for it to refresh. But there you go, now it's set up properly. You see the trace goes above 100 and a little bit below 0. Let's switch back to Premiere Pro. I'm going to change this to the waveform scope by going to the panel menu, going to Waveform. We see we have basically the same kind of a view, a little bit above 100, a little bit below 0. So it looks like the 2 scopes work similarly, but there'll be a little bit of a difference when we go back to SpeedGrade. So let's do that. I'm going to start changing things here, and I want you to watch what happens here. I'm going to go down to this clip's grading tools down here. I'm going to change the shadows by hovering over this on the left-hand side. This is the offset here. I'm going to drag it to the right a bit to bring those guys up a bit, and notice how the scale moves in addition to the trace. There's the trace moving, and the scale adjusts accordingly as well. You won't see that inside Premiere Pro. That's the way it's supposed to work. So we line it up like that. Bring the highlights down by dragging them left. Pull them down, and I'm bringing the scale up. Now, if that little jumping around is disconcerting to you, there's a way to stop that, and that is to create a custom lookup table. I created one here for this purpose. I'll go down to this little plus there. Click on that. Click on LUT. That brings up this drop-down list here. Select this LUT from this list. You won't have this LUT. This is one that I made. It's called SengStack Scale 0 to 1023. Click on that. That changes the way the waveform works such that things won't move around. If I click on this clip again, go back to the primary here, move this around now, then the scale doesn't move. The trace moves, but the scale doesn't move. Let me show you how you can create that LUT. I'm going to minimize this. So I'm going to navigate to where the Adobe programs are stored on the main drive. Go to Program Files, go to Adobe, down to SpeedGrade CC, go to Lumetri. I'm going down to the LUTs, the lookup tables. I'm going to take a look at a LUT that you should have in your system. Scrolling down here to this one here, the Scale 64 to 940. I'm going to open that up with a text editor. To do that here in Windows, I just right-click on that and say Open With, and then I select this text editor here called Notepad. This will work differently on a Mac. Nevertheless, just open this up with some kind of text editor. Click OK here. And that's what this LUT looks like. It's a very simple LUT. It limits the output to something less than fully black and less than fully white. Something a little bit more than 0 and something a little bit less than 1023. This is for use with a 10-bit system, so 1023 is the highest value and 0 is the lowest. Now I don't want to limit the output, but I do want to control how the waveform scope works. So I created another LUT very much like this. It's down here. Double-click on it. You see that it's pretty much the same. The only differences are the ranges here. Instead of going from 64 to 940, I go from 0 to 1023, the full 10-bit range. You can do something very much like this. You can open up this file, change it, and then save it as something else. In my case, I named it SingStack Scale 0 to 1023. And then you store it in the same place where you found this original one here inside the LUTs folder. Then you need to shut down SpeedGrade, and the next time you open up SpeedGrade, that new LUT will be there. If you do choose to use this lookup table method to limit the bouncing around of the waveform scope, then make sure you put that LUT above everything you work on here inside the layers panel. If you put it below it, for instance, like that, you'll actually crush the blacks and clip the whites, so you don't want to do that. So you want it above everything you're working on here inside the layers panel. Let's change from the waveform to the RGB parade, so right-click here, and go to the RGB parade. It's called parade here. And notice that it locks things off there at the top. Looks like it's clipping, but in fact it's not. That's this LUT that I applied. So I'm going to get rid of the LUT for now. Click on that, press the delete. And now things will settle down, and you see that the traces go above 100 and below 0, the same way they do for the waveform scope. Let's go back to Premiere Pro. Change this view to the RGB parade by clicking this panel menu, going to RGB parade. And notice that it cuts things off at 100 and 0. You can't see how much the red channel goes above 100 or how much the green channel goes above 100 or below 0 in all three cases. You just can't see that. So you really can't estimate what you need to do to fix things by looking at the RGB parade scope here in Premiere Pro. It doesn't work as well as the RGB parade scope does inside SpeedGrade. Let's go on down to the HD bars and tone here. I want to change this view from the RGB parade to the vector scope. Go up to the panel menu, go to the vector scope, and the vector scope behaves just the way it should. It displays saturation and color here. You've got 75% saturated red, 100% saturated red, these two dots there. These are the two red colors there, showing up as 75% and 100%. Same for blue, these two guys like that. And green is only one, that's this one here, that's 75% saturated. Then you've got some yellows, 175%. You got magenta at 75% and cyan at 75 and 100. They're all represented by these colors here. And they're lined up perfectly in those little spots. This is telling you that the color bars are properly set. All right, let's take a look at the vector scope inside SpeedGrade. To switch to the vector scope, just right-click here and select vector scope. Let's move the playhead over to the HD bars and tone. And right away, you'll notice that there's a big difference between the vector scope here and what you see inside Premiere Pro. Here, it's just a bunch of little dots. Let's press the P key to get a better look at it. The reason you're seeing a bunch of little dots is because SpeedGrade's vector scope, like all scopes in SpeedGrade, is designed to cater to raw workflows. And it's designed to work in parallel with external scopes. In particular, the SpeedGrade vector scope works in the HSL color space, that's hue, saturation, and lightness, as opposed to the vector scope in Premiere Pro, which works in the YUV color space, luma and chroma. So the SpeedGrade vector scope is not something you would use on a practical basis in the Premiere Pro direct link workflow. I'm going to press the P key to shrink this back down again. Finally, let's take a look at the histogram, which is not something you've seen inside Premiere Pro. I have these two clips lined up here so I can take a color from this one and apply it to the next one. Switch to the histogram by right-clicking here and go to histogram. The histogram shows how things line up in terms of color. It'll shift here in a second. There we go. We have way too much cyan, which is a combination of green and blue. You see how it turns into cyan there? We get green around the edge and blue around the edge. We need to bring the reds up here to neutralize this thing. Well, what I've done here, I've zoomed in on that little tablecloth in the dining room setting, and we're going to use it as a reference point and then apply this grade to something else. So I'm going to go over here to the midtones. I'm going to lift up the reds a bit here, holding down the shift key and just dragging this little plus up, and watch how the reds move up and the cyan, the greens and blues move down. Now this won't be perfect. There's a lot more work to do here to fix this all up, but that's kind of a start anyways. And now that I've used this as a reference point and used the histogram as that purpose, I'm going to go to the next clip here by just dragging the playhead over to the right there. I want to apply the color grade from this clip to this one. You just go to the numeric keypad and press the number 1, and that applies the speed grade from the clip 1 clip to the left of the one you want to apply it to. So I press 1, and it applies that grading we just used there, and it actually turned out pretty well. And if you like what you see, then you press the enter or return key to accept it. And now you've taken a grade that you applied to one clip and applied it to another simply using this little keyboard shortcut. So that's a quick rundown on the scopes here inside SpeedGrade.